Had to switch my other phone, so hopefully this is my last time doing this tonight. So I'm gonna talk real quick. Yeah, like I was saying, you think about them, they wasn't like a pastoralist civilization merely, you know what I mean? They lasted for at least 400 years, again, on the opposite side of the map in East Africa. Contemporaries to the Malians. The Malian Empire, for example, started in 1235 under Sundiata Keita. Even really before that, it's just as far as like when it became an empire, it was in 1235. Now, I know the history thoroughly all the way up to Mansa Musa, but I'm not going to go through that whole history again because it would take too long. But as far as like the kingship and the different masters, think about it, like Sundiata Keita, for example, 1235 all the way up to 1255, 20 years, and then his first biological son, Wali, after him, reigning for 15 years from 1255 to 1270, and then his brother Wadi from 1270 to 1274, and then their other brother, the second adopted child by Sundiata Keita, which was Khalifa, who became Mansa for a year before he was executed due to the laws of the Constitution, him being a tyrant and depriving people of their life. And then finally Sundiata Keita's brother himself, who was his blood also, Abu Bakr, reigning for about 10 years from 1275 to 1285, and then after him, Mansa Socorro, who was also initially adopted or whatever, but, he reigned for about, 15 years, 1285 to 1300, and then after him, Mansa Gayo from 1300 to 1305, and then his son Mansa Muhammad from 1305 to 1310, and then that's when Abu Bakr II, the person that made the famous, attempt of an expedition to the Americas, and died at sea. So he only reigned for about a year or whatnot. And then after him, Mansa Musa or whatnot, who made the famous pilgrimage. I'm not finna go through all of that because it would take too long. But the whole thing is, as far as like him, when you think about it, the Malians definitely were one of the most richest empires in history. And, considering the expenditure of gold, large excess expenditures of gold during his trip as far as Mansa Musa, he was only like the third Malian king that was documented or purported to have made the trip to Mecca. He wasn't the only one. 2 Malian Mansas went to Mecca before him. Mansa Socorro, the guy that I mentioned that reigned from 1285 to 1300. Then before Mansa Socorro, Sundiata Keita's actual biological son himself, Mansa Wali, made the pilgrimage to Mecca. So my point in bringing that up is that if Mansa Musa was that rich, that means all the fucking Mansas were. Their whole entire empire was rich. It's just that Mansa Musa is heavily documented to have made this journey and decided to spend a great deal of their wealth. So going all the way back as far as like 1270, when Wali made his journey, he was just as rich as Mansa Musa. He just didn't make any type of gold expenditures because he didn't accidentally kill his mom, so he wasn't trying to repent. That's just the Malians. And then you go back before the Malians, you talk about the Ghanaians, the Ghanaian Empire. It's a guy named, and I read this when I was in Memphis, Tennessee in 2017. I actually read the whole entire passage about the Ghanaian history. He had a book called, this guy Al Bakar, he had a book called Book of Routes and Realms, and he published it in 1068. That very same year, during that same time, the king of the Ghanaian king of Ouagadougou, as it used to be called, his name was Taka Menin at the time. You know what I mean? And based on what I could recall from this description, Al Gaba was the town where the Ghanaian king lived at or whatever. It was another town that was a part of Kumbay Saleh, which is where Al Ghaba was housed at. The other town was more so Islamic or whatever, because they did have a dual religious practice going on at the time, and Islam was included in that. The whole point is, as far as this book description, the book of Routes and Rams by al-Bakr, I remember him mentioning that as far as their army, they had like 250,000 in their army that possessed arrows and bows. You get what I'm saying? The Ghanaians wasn't destroyed until 1076 when they got into it with the Almoravid Confederation, who had just recently started before that in 1054 from a guy named Abdallah Al-Yassin or whatnot. You know what I mean? When they finally wiped the Ghanaians off the map in 1076 and destroyed their town, Al Ghaba, that you can't find in history at all. So, it's a lot of history. Then you think about, like, okay, I ain't gonna go too deep on this. This is for a future blog that I'm saving, but I'm gonna go ahead and mention it. Like arrows and bows, for example, right? As I mentioned before, a lot of the oldest arrows and bows come from Europe, Scandinavia. But as far as on the continent of Africa itself, even though I highlighted this before, when I was talking about like some of the oldest places in the world that got arrows and bows outside of Egypt, and I also mentioned the Ghanaians, and I mentioned the reference from al-Bakr because I was writing on somebody else's post a long time ago. But anyway, here's another place, Zambia. You know, the oldest arrow and bow found there, you know how old them shits is? 12,000 years. 12,000 years ago. Alright? And the invention of an arrow and bow is very significant because it's not a biological necessity. So that's an example of cultural influence. Again, hinting at a lot of lost history, but I ain't gonna veer too much off this because I do not want my phone to cut off and I want to get through this. The final thing that I'm gonna mention is in West Africa itself. Now, I found out about this about like 5, 6 years ago, and when I read about it, I was so fucking intrigued, but I was happy at the same time. Now, in West Africa, Mauritania, right, there's like 4 major old settlements, the oldest on the fucking coast of West Africa. Them shits go back to 4500 BC, 6,000 years ago, almost 7,000 years ago. These were stone settlements. 4 major locations. One was called Dar Tachit, or Tachich. So it'll be DHAR and then DHAR hyphen TICHITT. Another one is called Dar Walata. Another one called Dar Nema, NEMA. And then the last one was called Dar Tagat. Now, as far as Dar Tatich, that was the oldest settlement, and that was supposed to have been on a high plateau. But as far as like the rest of the other 3 main ones, they pretty much had the same description. But Dar Tachich was the oldest one. And based on archaeology and what I read, they were saying like some of these places had paved streets or whatever. These were, you know, they had huge stones and blocks, and they had organizations. They had little places and buildings for like granaries and livestock and all this type of stuff. So based on the description, because I want to do a vlog about them in the future because I think it's so significant, it's almost like they were almost like an empire, I will argue, possibly. And as far as like Dar Tachich, you know, the earliest abandonment of that site is only like 2300 BC. The rest of the other 3 sites that I named, they were occupied up until like 500 BC. And as far as, again, some of the architectural designs, they're similar to that of Kumbay Saleh. All right, remember that was the capital of the Ghanaians back then. So as far as West Africa, that's significant because Egypt, I do know this, and I rechecked it yesterday. The oldest fucking pyramid in Egypt, the Step Pyramid in Saqqara, goes back to 2650 BC. All right. Now Pharaoh Khufu's son, his name was Pharaoh Khafre. He reigned from 2558 to 2532 BC. So about 26 years. He's the first pharaoh where megalithic structures were built after him. Now, if you think about this period and you compare them to that site in West